My name is Sarah. I'm 31 years old, and I'm about to tell you a story that I never thought I'd have to tell. 18 months ago, my world changed in a way I couldn't have predicted. My parents made a decision that shattered everything I thought I knew about family, about fairness, about what we owe each other. They gave their entire fortune to my sister. Not some of it, not half, not even most of it, all of it. $2 million that they had accumulated over 40 years of marriage, gone, transferred, given away to my younger sister, like I was never part of the family at all. But here's where it gets worse. 12 months after they made that decision, the FBI showed up at my door with questions. Before I tell you what they wanted or what I discovered, please take a moment to like and subscribe. I need you to hear this story because I think it might change how you understand family and loyalty and what happens when people who are supposed to love you make choices that destroy you instead. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now let me take you back to where this all began, to the pattern that made this moment inevitable. Growing up, I learned very early that I was the backup plan. My sister, Claire, she was the golden child. Beautiful, charming, effortlessly talented at everything she touched. When we were young and our parents would take us places, people would stop them on the street to tell them how gorgeous Claire was. She'd blush and smile and everyone would melt. I was just there, quieter, bookish. Never quite the right kind of pretty or the right kind of interesting. Our parents tried, I think. They loved us both. But love, I realized, was finite in our house. It was a limited resource, and Claire got the bigger share. When I was 10, I won a regional chess championship. I was the youngest person to win in the state. I came home so excited, holding the trophy high, wanting to run through the door and tell them everything. But Dad was on the phone with someone about Claire's dance competition. She'd come in second, which apparently was devastating. They barely looked at my trophy. "We'll celebrate tomorrow," Mom said. But tomorrow never came. What came instead was a conversation about how Claire's dance instructor said she had real potential if she just practiced harder, and maybe we should think about paying for private lessons with someone better. The money went to Claire's dance. My chess trophy went in a box in the basement. By high school, I'd stopped expecting them to notice my achievements. Claire got perfect grades too, but people congratulated her. I got perfect grades, and they said, "Good job. Now help your sister with her college applications." She wanted to go to Princeton. I was helping her practice her interview while my own application sat untouched. She got in. She's a legacy, they said proudly, both of them beaming. When I got accepted to Yale, full scholarship, there was a pause. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom said, "but Claire is really struggling with the transition. Can you maybe stay closer to home?" Yale is in Connecticut. It wasn't closer to home than Princeton, but I understood the message. I went to state school instead, paid my own way, worked 3 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, and nobody asked me about that struggle. They were too busy helping Claire adjust to the Ivy League. Our parents weren't cruel people. That's what made it harder. They were nice, thoughtful, generous, just not with me. At least not in the ways that mattered. I was good at taking care of myself. I was independent. I was fine. That's what my mother would say whenever I needed something. "You're fine. You'll figure it out," which I always did. But independence, I realize now, is just another word for invisibility in a family that can't see you. By the time I was an adult, I'd made peace with this. Or I thought I had. I graduated with my degree in accounting, got a good job at a firm, worked my way up to senior manager. I was building a solid life on my own terms. I had a stable income, a nice apartment, friends who loved me. I didn't need my parents' attention or approval anymore, but I also didn't pull away completely. I called them on Sundays. I visited for holidays. I maintained the relationship because that's what you do. That's what family means. And I suppose, somewhere deep down, I was still hoping that maybe one day they'd see me, really see me. Maybe they'd realize that I'd turned into someone worth noticing. Maybe they'd finally understand the value of the daughter who'd survived in the shadows. Claire, meanwhile, had used her Princeton degree to become a life coach. She was beautiful, and charismatic, and people wanted to pay her money to tell them how to be better versions of themselves. She was wildly successful, which was wonderful for her. But it also meant she had money. Good money. She bought a house in a trendy neighborhood. She drove a Tesla. She went on fancy vacations and posted about them on Instagram. She was living the dream that our parents had always implicitly told her was her birthright. The kind of life where success came naturally, where love was unconditional, where being chosen was just the default setting of existence. I was happy for her, mostly. We'd never been particularly close, and as adults, we had even less in common. But I didn't resent her success. What I resented was that somehow, despite my own success, I was still invisible in the family narrative. My parents talked about Claire constantly. They went to her wellness retreats. They attended her speaking engagements. They bragged about her to their friends. They became fixtures in her world, supporters and cheerleaders, and the kind of parents that people wrote gratitude posts about. When they introduced me, it was always as an afterthought. This is my daughter Sarah. She works in accounting. That was it. No pride, no expansion, just a statement of fact. Like I was a car she drove, functional but not worth any real discussion. When I was 30, I got promoted to senior manager. I organized a small celebration and invited my parents. They came for about 20 minutes. Claire had texted them during the dinner to say she was having a crisis with one of her high-profile clients, someone famous who was threatening to leave if Claire didn't agree to a special private coaching package. My parents checked their phones, made excuses, and left to go comfort her. There were no other crises. I found out later that Claire had invented the whole thing because she was jealous that my promotion celebration might shift focus away from her for an evening. She'd actually bragged about it to a friend who told a mutual acquaintance who eventually mentioned it to me in casual conversation. So there I was, celebrating something I'd worked years to achieve, abandoned for a fabricated emergency. But by then, my parents had already shown me where my place was in the hierarchy. I was the reliable one, the one who didn't need anything, the one whose moments could be sacrificed for Claire's drama. That was my role. That was my purpose in the family structure. 3 years ago, my parents called me into a family meeting. They'd never done this before, but Claire was there, and something felt ceremonial about it. They were sitting in the living room, the same living room where I'd celebrated minor victories my whole life, and watched them give all their emotional energy to my sister. That room had seen 20 years of my barely noticed achievements. It had been the backdrop for Claire's triumphs, the place where she'd learned that she was the only one who mattered. Dad cleared his throat. "We've been thinking," he said, "and we want to tell you about our estate plans." Claire watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between anticipation and guilt, I think. "Your mother and I have accumulated a fair amount of money over the years," Dad continued. $2 million, actually. It's in various accounts and investments. Mutual funds, real estate investments, retirement accounts, a lifetime of careful financial planning. We're not young anymore. We want to make sure it's handled properly. My mother nodded, smiled at Claire. That smile was full of warmth. "We've decided to transfer the entire amount to Claire." The words didn't make sense at first. I thought maybe I'd misheard. "What do you mean transfer it to Claire?" They didn't answer right away. "Your sister is going to be the family wealth manager," Mom said finally. "She's going to administer it for all of us when we're gone." "But why not split it?" I asked, and I heard my own voice shake slightly. "Why not give us each something?" They exchanged a look. "Because," Dad said carefully, "Claire needs it for her business expansion. She wants to build a wellness center, a retreat space. It would be a significant investment. She's got this vision, you see, a place where people can come and heal and be their best selves. It's beautiful, really." I looked at my sister. She was smiling. Not a big smile, just a small one, controlled, like she was trying not to show too much emotion. She looked like she'd won something she'd been waiting for her entire life. And I suddenly understood. This wasn't about the business. This was about what it had always been about. Claire was the chosen one, the chosen daughter, the one who mattered more. The rest of us were just background characters in her story, supporting players who existed only to make her shine brighter. I tried to reason with them. Mom, Dad, I have student loans, I said, thinking maybe if I explained that I'd struggled, they'd understand why I needed some help. I have a car that's falling apart. I don't have a safety net like Claire does. Claire's already successful. She's already making money. Couldn't you at least split it? Give us each something? Sarah, Mom said in that tone that meant the conversation was over. You're being selfish. Your sister has bigger dreams. You should be happy for her. You should be proud of what she's accomplishing. And that was it. They'd made their decision. $2 million to Claire. Nothing to me. No discussion, no compromise, no acknowledgement that I might have needs or dreams or that I'd been a good daughter in the ways that could be measured. I got up and walked out of that meeting feeling something I'd never felt before. Not sad, not angry, but numb. Like I was grieving something that was never really mine to lose. Like I was mourning the daughter I could have been if they'd ever actually seen me. The day of the announcement was the kind of day where everything should have felt different, but nothing did. I went to work like normal. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. What would I say? My parents gave my sister $2 million and gave me nothing? It sounded pathetic out loud. It sounded like I was making it about myself when it should have been Claire's moment of joy. Everyone kept telling me how lucky Claire was, how wonderful that their parents were supporting her dreams, how generous, how loving. They'd see Claire posting about it on social media and comment about how she had the best parents in the world. And I smiled and agreed and died a little inside each time. Each comment felt like a confirmation that they'd made the right choice, that Claire was worth more, that I was insignificant by comparison. My parents threw Claire a party that weekend. They rented out a restaurant in the fanciest part of town. They invited family friends, her business associates, her wealthy new client base. The kind of party that announced to the world that Claire was important, that she was worthy of this kind of investment, that our parents believed in her in a way they apparently didn't believe in anyone else. They toasted her and her business acumen and her vision for the future. They talked about her dreams and her courage and her potential. My father actually cried while talking about how proud he was of everything Claire had accomplished and how grateful he was to be able to support her in this next chapter. How it was a privilege to invest in her future. That word, privilege. Like it was a gift. Like it was something she'd earned, like it was the natural order of things for parents to make sacrifices for her. I stood in the corner of that party in a black dress that felt like armor, and I realized something important. This wasn't a moment of generosity. This was a moment of definition, a public declaration of who mattered in our family. My parents were literally putting their money where their mouth was, saying, with numbers and documents and legal transfers, that Claire was the one worth saving. Claire was the one worth protecting. Claire was the one worth an entire fortune. I didn't matter. Not in any way that counted. Not in any way that could be measured in money or attention or pride or tears. I excused myself to the bathroom and sat in a stall for 10 minutes. I considered leaving. I considered never going back. I considered calling a lawyer right then and there to find out if I had any legal recourse. But of course I didn't. They'd done nothing illegal. They could give their money to whoever they wanted. That was the most painful part. What they'd done was perfectly legal. It was just cruel. But I was good at suffering in silence, and good at swallowing my pain, so I composed myself, came back out, and hugged my sister while cameras flashed, and everyone recorded it for her Instagram story. She posted the photo with the caption, "Best parents ever." So grateful for their support and their unconditional love. I'm visible in the background, smiling that smile I'd perfected over 30 years. But if you look closely at the photo, you can see I'm barely there, almost invisible, like I was a ghost haunting the edges of someone else's celebration. A month after the announcement, the strangeness began. Little things at first. Claire called me crying, saying that there was a problem with the funds. The money that was supposed to be transferred wasn't moving. Something about paperwork delays. She was worried, she said. Our parents said the bank was investigating some irregularities. An audit, they said. Nothing serious, just procedural. Something about some of the accounts not being clearly documented, but the calls kept coming. Claire was panicked. She'd already promised clients they'd have the retreat space by next year. She'd already hired architects and consultants. She'd already created the business plan and told investors what was coming. She'd made commitments based on money that hadn't actually transferred yet. She was in deep. My parents kept saying it would be resolved soon. They weren't worried, they said. These things take time, just bureaucracy. But 6 weeks turned into 2 months. The bank continued investigating. Our parents' explanations became vaguer, less confident. And then one morning, I got a call from my father. His voice sounded strange, tight with something I'd never heard from him before. Can you come over? Today? I couldn't leave work, not really, but I did anyway. Some calls you just answer. I went to the house where I'd grown up. My parents looked older than they had at Claire's party just 8 weeks earlier. Like they'd aged years and months. My mother's hands were shaking. She was smoking a cigarette, something I'd never seen her do. We have something to tell you, Dad said. We need to tell you everything. We told you we were transferring money to Claire. We told her that we were transferring money, that we were giving her our entire fortune. But there's a problem. There always is, I thought, even as I said nothing. We can't. We can't actually do it legally. There are complications with the financial accounts. Some of the money is tied up in things we don't fully understand. Things we thought were investments. Things that our financial advisor told us were safe and sound. Some of it, well, we got investment advice that we're now realizing might not have been sound. Might not have been legitimate, actually. My father looked at me. His eyes were red. We might have lost a significant portion of it. All of it, maybe. I felt something like vindication, which made me immediately hate myself for feeling vindication about my parents' financial ruin. So there's no $2 million? I asked, needing clarity, needing to hear the words. Not all of it, Mom said quietly. Not anymore. Not for a long time, maybe. Never. The bank is investigating the firm that was managing some of our money. It appears they may have committed fraud. We're trying to get legal help, but it's expensive and we're not sure how much we'll recover, if anything. Claire didn't call me for 2 weeks after they told her. 2 weeks of silence while the implications sank in. When she finally did, she was furious. Not at our parents for promising her money they didn't actually have. Not at our parents for making announcements before they had the full picture. But at me. Like somehow I was responsible for the fact that the inheritance had disappeared. You knew, she said accusingly. You knew this would happen, and you didn't warn me. I didn't know anything, I said, genuinely confused. How would I have known? You always know things. You're always so careful and smart with money. You could have told them to be more careful. You could have helped. But instead, you let this happen to me. She was blaming me for not saving her from the consequences of being the favorite. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Your parents told us both they were giving you $2 million, I said slowly. And I think you're angry at them, but you're yelling at me instead. No, she said. No, I'm angry at you because you didn't do more to protect me from this. Like my role in life was to save her from the consequences of being the favorite, which maybe, I realized, is exactly what I was supposed to be doing my entire life. That's when everything started to unravel. The fraud investigation deepened. Our parents' lawyers wanted to know every detail about their financial accounts, their investment advisors, their banking practices. My father became obsessed with understanding what had gone wrong. He spent hours on the phone with investigators, with lawyers, with bank representatives. He wanted explanations, wanted to know how he could have missed the warning signs, wanted to understand what he should have asked differently. My mother, meanwhile, withdrew almost completely. She'd sit in the kitchen, staring at the window, barely speaking. The woman who'd smiled so warmly at Claire during that announcement party had become a ghost in her own house. A woman who'd made a public statement about her daughter's importance and then watched that importance evaporate when it was revealed the money didn't exist. I started calling more often, not because they'd asked me to, but because I could feel something breaking. My parents' entire worldview, the one that had prioritized Claire's success above everything else, had been built on a foundation of money that was never really theirs to give. And now that foundation was cracking. The cracks were spreading. 3 weeks after the phone call, where Claire blamed me for not preventing the loss of her inheritance, my parents called me again. There was something else, they said, something worse. The investment firm that had been managing their money wasn't just incompetent, they'd been actively defrauding their clients, stealing from them, systematically and deliberately. There would be a federal investigation. Our parents would have to cooperate with federal agents. They would likely recover some funds, but it could take years. Years, they said, all while lawyers charged them thousands of dollars monthly. All while they tried to figure out how to recalibrate their retirement, their future, their expectations. The party they'd thrown for Claire, the one where they'd publicly declared their wealth and their generosity, suddenly felt like the announcement of a ship that was already sinking. I listened to my father explain this on the phone, and something shifted in me. I finally heard him, really heard him. Not as a parent who'd chosen Claire over me, but as a man who'd made a mistake. A mistake about money, sure, but also about priorities. He'd believed that giving Claire everything would make her happy, would make them a better family, would prove his love. Instead, it had exposed how fragile their financial situation was, how vulnerable they'd been to manipulation, how the desire to provide for one child had blinded them to the needs of another, how it had also blinded them to the damage they were doing to the child they'd left behind. I still didn't forgive him. Not yet. But I stopped being angry. Anger requires energy, and I was exhausted from carrying it for so long. Instead, I felt something different, sadness maybe, or compassion. Or maybe just the weight of understanding that my parents weren't villains. They were just people who'd made terrible choices. And now, those choices were catching up with them in the form of federal investigators and lawyers, and the slow realization that they'd spent decades prioritizing the wrong things. That they'd given away a fortune they didn't fully understand. That they'd broken promises based on assumptions. That they'd hurt their daughter in the process. And as I felt that sadness, I realized something else. I finally had something they needed. I finally had something valuable to offer. I finally had answers they were searching for. Understanding, perspective. The kind of clarity that comes from watching someone else's downfall from the outside. The FBI had questions about their financial decisions, about where they'd gotten their investment advice, about the firm that had stolen from them, and they thought maybe, just maybe, I could help. That in my role as an accountant, as someone who understood finances in a way they apparently never had, I could give them something worth giving, could finally be useful to them in a way that mattered. It was funny in a bitter sort of way. The one thing they wanted from me now was the one thing I'd been trying to give them my entire life. Worth. Value. Something they couldn't ignore. Something they finally couldn't dismiss as I prepared for what was coming next. For what the FBI would ask. For what would be revealed in the documents and conversations to follow, I understood one thing clearly. This wasn't about money anymore. Not really. This was about the price of favoritism, the cost of invisibility, the consequences of building a family on a foundation of unequal love. And those consequences were coming due in the form of federal investigators who wanted to know every detail of my parents' financial history. They were coming for the truth. And I, the invisible daughter, finally had something they needed to hear. The first 6 months after they told me about the fraud were strange. I didn't hear from my parents much. They were busy dealing with lawyers, with the FBI, with the slow realization that their entire financial world had been a lie. Claire stopped calling me entirely. I think the reality was settling in for her. The fact that there was never going to be a wellness retreat, never going to be that expansion, never going to be a $2 million foundation for her vision. She'd built everything on sand, and the tide was coming in, and she couldn't stand to watch it happen. I'd heard through my mother that Claire had stopped answering calls from investors, that she'd quietly backed out of her consulting contracts, that she was spending most of her time in her house trying to figure out how to untangle the mess she'd created. My parents, on the other hand, needed me in ways they never had before. They'd call asking for advice about financial documents they didn't understand. Could I look at this? Could I interpret that? Could I help them understand what their accountant was telling them? Sometimes they'd call 3 times in a single day with different questions, different concerns, different documents they needed me to explain. They'd apologize for calling so much, but they'd call anyway because I was the only one who made sense of the chaos. Suddenly, I was valuable. Suddenly, my accounting degree, the thing they'd always treated as practical and boring and not worth celebrating, became the most important thing I could offer. There was something almost darkly funny about it, if I'm being honest. I'd spent 30 years trying to make them understand that my skills mattered, that my education was worth something. And it took a federal fraud investigation for them to finally believe it. But I didn't point that out. I just answered their calls and walked them through the documents and felt something shift, slowly, in how they looked at me. I went to their house one Saturday afternoon in month 4 of the investigation. My mother looked like she'd aged 5 years. She was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, statements, documents. She looked up when I came in, and I saw something I'd never seen before. She looked at me like she needed me, like I was the only one who could help. I sat down across from her, and she pushed a folder toward me. "Can you make sense of this?" I opened it. It was a statement from the investment firm, highlighting all the fraudulent transactions, all the money that had been stolen. She'd highlighted certain lines in yellow. She'd been trying to understand it herself. I walked her through it, explained what each figure meant, where the money had gone, what portions they might recover. She took notes. She asked questions. And something shifted in the room. It was small, maybe imperceptible to anyone else, but I felt it. For the first time in my life, my mother was actually listening to me. Not in a dismissive way, not in a token way, but really listening, really needing what I had to say. Dad was worse, or maybe better, depending on how you look at it. He was more devastated. The man who'd built his entire identity around providing for his family, around being the successful businessman with the smart financial decisions, had been thoroughly outsmarted. He'd made a terrible mistake, and he knew it. He'd put their future at risk. He'd put their children at risk. And he'd done it while being so focused on proving himself and his capabilities that he'd stopped paying attention to anything else. I found him in his study on one of those visits, just staring out the window. "Dad?" I said quietly. He didn't turn around. "I've been thinking about something," he said, "about how we treated you, about how we chose Claire every single time, and I wonder if maybe that's why I was so desperate to give her everything. Like I could measure my love in dollars. Like money was the only way I knew how to say that I cared about you both." He turned to look at me finally, and his eyes were devastated. "But I didn't give you anything, did I? Not money, not attention, not pride. And she got everything. She got it all. And now she has nothing." He sat down heavily. I was trying so hard to be the kind of father who could provide, who could give his children the world, that I stopped actually being a father at all. He looked at me. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry it took losing everything to realize what I was doing. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't forgive him yet. But I could sit with him. I could hand him tissues when he cried. I could let him slowly understand, through painful clarity, what favoritism actually costs." By month 5, Claire had tried to take out a loan against her expected inheritance. The inheritance that no longer existed. The bank denied her. She'd already spent money on consulting, on marketing, on a non-refundable deposit on land for her retreat center. She'd created a whole business plan, commissioned logos, built a website. She told her Instagram followers that something big was coming, that she was about to launch the most transformative wellness experience of their lives. And now, she was facing the fallout of having made promises based on money that wasn't hers to promise. She was in debt, real debt, not the manageable kind, the kind that keeps you up at night, the kind that makes you panic about paying rent, the kind that forces you to have conversations you never wanted to have with creditors and banks and people you'd promised things to. She called me crying one night at 11 o'clock. "I can't do this," she said. "I can't get out of this. My parents won't help, they can't help, and I've destroyed everything." I listened to her cry on the phone, and I thought about listening to her blame me for not preventing the loss of her inheritance. I thought about all the years of being invisible while she was celebrated. I thought about the party that was thrown for her when the money was supposed to be hers, and how no one even mentioned that I existed. I thought about how I could tell her right now that she deserved this, that maybe this would teach her something about how the world actually works, that maybe now she'd understand what it felt like to be abandoned. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "Have you talked to a bankruptcy attorney?" "No," she whispered. "I don't even know where to start." I gave her a referral, an attorney I knew from work who handled these things. She was shocked. "You're helping me? After everything?" I didn't answer. I just said that being a person meant you helped people when you could, even when they hadn't helped you, even when they'd actively hurt you. Maybe especially then. That sometimes the hardest thing you could do was be decent to someone who didn't deserve decency, but being decent anyway was what made you human. By month 6, the FBI had enough information to start filing charges against the investment firm. The owners were arrested. The fraud was more extensive than anyone had initially realized. Not just my parents, but hundreds of clients had been stolen from. Hundreds of families had their retirements, their children's college funds, their life savings all taken. My parents weren't special in their victimization. They were just one of many. The FBI called my father in for an official statement. He sat across from federal agents and told them everything he could remember about how he'd found the firm, what promises they'd made, what documents he'd signed without fully understanding them. He was humiliated, but he did it. It was one of the most honest things I'd ever seen him do. Now, let me tell you what happened in months 7 through 12, because that's when things got very real. In month 7, the investigation deepened, and investigators wanted to interview me. Not as a witness, but as someone who could help them understand the financial documents. I was asked to consult on the case, to explain in layman's terms what the fraud had looked like, how it had been hidden, how it had gone undetected for so long. I agreed. It felt like my purpose was finally aligning with reality. I was good at understanding financial documents. I was careful and thorough and precise. These were traits my parents had never celebrated, but the FBI valued them highly. I spent month 8 reviewing documents with federal investigators. I walked them through each fraudulent transaction, explained how the investment firm had disguised the theft, how they'd sent fake statements showing growth when money was actually being stolen. I showed them how my parents, like so many other clients, had failed to ask the right questions because they'd trusted the wrong people. By month 9, I was asked to testify before a grand jury. I was subpoenaed. The investment firm's lawyers tried to discredit me, tried to suggest that my analysis was biased, that I had some personal reason to be dishonest. But I didn't. I had documentation. I had facts. I had the kind of careful, methodical analysis that their lawyers couldn't argue with. The grand jury returned indictments. 6 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of money laundering, conspiracy charges. The owners of the investment firm were facing significant prison time. My parents read the articles in the newspaper with a mix of vindication and grief. On one hand, they were right. They had been victimized. On the other hand, knowing you were right didn't give you back your $2 million. It didn't undo the damage. By month 10, something shifted in my family. Claire called a family meeting. She'd done her bankruptcy filing. She'd lost the land deposit, but she was rebuilding. She wasn't happy about it, but she was doing it. The wellness center website came down. The Instagram posts were deleted. The promises she'd made were quietly withdrawn. She'd gotten a job as a wellness consultant at an established company, making a fraction of what she thought she'd be making. It wasn't her own business. It wasn't her vision. It wasn't the dream that our parents had been so proud to support. But it was honest work and it was paying her bills, and that was something. We sat around my parents' dining room table, the same table where they'd announced they were giving Claire their entire fortune. The table that had been the backdrop for her moment of supreme importance. We sat there and had a conversation we should have had years ago. "I'm sorry," Claire said, looking directly at me. Her voice was shaky, uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. "I'm sorry that I blamed you. I'm sorry that I made this about you when it was my responsibility. I believed something that wasn't true, and I acted on it without questioning it. I hurt you because I was hurt, and that wasn't fair. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know that sorry doesn't undo years of being the favorite and throwing that in your face. But I'm saying it anyway because it's true." I didn't rush to forgive her, but I acknowledged what she was saying. "I appreciate that," I said. "I really do. I don't know if we can repair what happened between us, not completely. But I appreciate you saying it. It means something that you can see what you did and own it, instead of making excuses. That's more than I expected." My father spoke next. "We failed you, Sarah. We failed both of you, but we failed you in a very specific way. We made you invisible, and then we were surprised when you didn't come save us." Claire got up and walked out. She couldn't stay for this reckoning. But I did. I listened to my parents acknowledge, finally, what they'd done. Not in the way I would have wanted. Not in the way that would undo all the years of hurt, but in a way that felt real and true. "We can't give you the money now," my mother said. "We don't have it. We're trying to recover what we can, but it's going to be years. And even if we do recover it all, we won't have $2 million. We'll have maybe half of that, maybe less. And we want you to understand that we're dividing it equally between you and Claire, if you'll let us." I stared at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve it," Dad said. "Not because you saved us, not because we need you now, but because you're our daughter and you deserved it from the beginning. We just took a long time to figure that out." In month 12, official charges were filed against the investment firm's owners. The federal prosecutors called me and explained exactly what they needed. They wanted me to make the fraud understandable, to explain to a jury of ordinary people how smart thieves hide stolen money, how they create the illusion of growth while actually draining accounts. They wanted my expertise, my careful analysis, my ability to take something complex and make it clear. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I sat in the witness stand and explained fraud in terms that regular people could understand. I walked them through the fake statements and the hidden transfers, the accounts that showed growth on paper while money was actually disappearing. The jury listened carefully. Some of them took notes. Some of them nodded like they finally understood how this could have happened to my parents, to hundreds of other people just like them. The defense tried to rattle me, tried to suggest my analysis was biased, that I had a personal stake in making the investment firm look guilty. But I didn't. I had facts. I had documentation. I had the kind of clarity that comes from understanding something deeply and being able to explain it simply. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Relief. Not vindication exactly, but relief that the truth had been established in an official way. That what happened to my parents, to all the people who'd been defrauded, was now documented in court records and punished by the justice system. That the lies had been exposed and the criminals would face consequences. The sentencing hearing happened in month 13. The owners of the investment firm were sentenced to 15 and 18 years respectively. They would spend significant time in federal prison. My father sat in the courtroom during sentencing and cried. Not happy tears, not satisfied tears, just tears. The kind that come when you realize that nothing, absolutely nothing, brings back the money that was stolen, the time that was wasted, the family relationships that were damaged. Restitution was ordered, but realistically, my parents would get back maybe 20% of what they'd lost. It would take years of restitution payments to even approach that number. I stood outside the courthouse afterward, and my father hugged me. "Thank you," he said. "I didn't do this for you," I said. "I did this because it was the right thing to do. and because I needed to look at myself in the mirror and know that I'd told the truth. He nodded. I know. And maybe that's the thing I'm most sorry about. You've always done the right thing, even when we gave you no reason to, even when we made it clear you weren't worth it. You kept doing the right thing anyway. And I never once told you that mattered. I never once celebrated that. I never made you feel like that was valuable. I looked at him. You're telling me now. He nodded. I'm telling you now. In the months after the trial, my life began to shift into a new normal. The legal stuff was largely over. The investigation was concluded. The conviction was final. What remained was the slower work of my family trying to figure out how to exist after everything had fallen apart. My parents started therapy. Both of them. They needed help understanding how they'd gotten to this place, how they'd made such terrible choices, how they'd hurt their children while thinking they were helping them. It was painful to watch. It was also necessary. Claire and I established a tentative peace. It wasn't friendship exactly. We'd been too hurt for too long to jump straight to that. But it was a beginning. We had lunch once a month. We talked about work. We made small talk. We didn't rehash the past, but we also didn't pretend it hadn't happened. It existed between us, acknowledged and real. The biggest shift was in how my parents saw me. I started to matter in ways I hadn't before. They asked about my work. They wanted to understand what I was doing. They seemed genuinely proud of the role I'd played in helping the investigation. It wasn't the pride I would have wanted when I was 22 and finishing my degree. It wasn't the celebration that would have meant the most, but it was something. It was real. About a year and a half into the investigation, my parents' attorney called. They were going to recover approximately $1.2 million. It was about 60% of what they'd originally lost. The rest was gone. But $1.2 million was more than nothing. It was enough to secure their retirement. It was enough to rebuild. And my father had decided something. He wanted to split it equally between Claire and me. A gift, he said, not an inheritance. A gift while they were alive so we could see them give it. I didn't know what to do with that offer. $600,000. It was more money than I'd ever had. It was the thing I'd needed so desperately when they'd chosen Claire. But now, receiving it felt complicated, because it couldn't erase what had happened. It couldn't bring back the years of invisibility. It couldn't undo the ways I learned to be small and quiet and invisible. I called my father. I said, I need to think about it. He said, I understand. There's no rush. But Sarah, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Not because you helped with the investigation, but because of who you are. Because you're smart and careful and good. And I should have told you that 30 years ago. I should have made you feel like you mattered. I'm sorry that it took losing everything to figure that out. I told him I needed time, and I did. But hearing him say those words I'd waited my entire life to hear, words that I'd thought would fix everything if they ever came, I realized something. Words are powerful, but they don't undo damage. They don't make up for decades of invisibility. They don't fix the fact that I'd learned to need nothing, to want nothing, to be nothing. What they do is open a door. And once that door is open, you get to decide what happens next. You get to decide if you want to walk through it. After everything that happened, after the investigation and the trial and the conviction and the restitution, I had to figure out who I wanted to be. I couldn't go back to being invisible. I didn't want to be angry anymore. I was tired of carrying the weight of their choices. So I decided to do something I'd never done before. I decided to ask for what I actually wanted. I called my father back. I said, I will accept the $600,000. But I want something else too. I want you to pay for my therapy. I want you to understand how your choices affected me. And I want regular family dinners where we talk about real things, not just surface pleasantries. I want you to actually see me. He agreed to all of it. We started family therapy together. It was excruciating and necessary. We talked about how favoritism damages everyone, how it damaged Claire too in ways we hadn't fully acknowledged, how it had shaped all of us in ways we were only beginning to understand. We talked about what it means to be a good parent and how my father had fallen short. We talked about what it means to be a good daughter and how I learned to be too good at not needing anyone. It wasn't a perfect process. There were moments where my mother got defensive. There were times when Claire still didn't understand. But there were also moments where real understanding happened. Moments where my father looked at me and actually saw me. Not as the invisible daughter, not as the one who solved their financial crisis, but as a person with my own needs and dreams and value. That was worth something. The $600,000 sits in a separate account now. I haven't touched it. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it yet. Maybe I'll use it to start my own firm. Maybe I'll travel. Maybe I'll just let it sit there as proof that something changed. What I know is that it didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the hurt or the years of invisibility, but it did give me a choice. And choice, I've learned, is the most valuable thing a parent can give a child. Not money, not attention, not pride. Just the actual freedom to choose who you want to be and not have to be small to earn love. I want to end by saying something to anyone out there who knows what it feels like to be invisible in your own family. To be the reliable one, the one who doesn't need anything, the one whose moments can be sacrificed for someone else's drama or comfort. I see you. Your invisibility was not your fault. It was a choice your family made, either consciously or unconsciously. But you don't have to keep accepting it. You don't have to keep being small. You can decide that your worth matters. You can ask for what you need. You can walk away if you need to. And if you're lucky, like I was, you might find that the people who hurt you can actually change. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. And if they can't, that's not your responsibility either. You're not responsible for fixing your family. You're not responsible for making them see you. You're only responsible for seeing yourself.